Hello everyone, myself Deepak Gupta, logging on this platform of College Dekho Learn to undertake this very important topic of corporate governance, which has been a latest and very requisite and very important and very sought after addition to our Companies Act. So the Companies Act of 1956 was very appropriately amended and was forced to be amended after the Satyam fraud, and it was a very dire need to incorporate the concept of corporate governance and strengthen it, and therefore we had a new Companies Act 2013. So today in this journey to understand the concept of corporate governance, which we will be covering in the mentioned topics, reason why the corporate governance was introduced and why it was so much stressed after, overall review about the corporate governance concept, actual definition as defined under various uh, recognized bodies, what actually corporate governance means as per the definition, as per the legal framework, where what are the various regulatory framework which have been defined to govern a company or to preview what is a how a company to be governed under corporate scenario, or we should say what actually the corporate governance is, that a corporate working is brought under a regulatory concept of the government. अ, मुझे अपने वर्ड्स थोड़े से और बेटर करने चाहिए। मुझे ये बोलना चाहिए कि रेगुलेटरी फ्रेमवर्क एक ऐसा मैकेनिज्म है जहाँ पर जिससे गवर्नमेंट ने अलग अलग एक्ट्स के बेसिस पर, अलग अलग लॉज, अलग अलग एनफोर्समेंट एजेंसीज के थ्रू कॉर्पोरेट वर्किंग के ऊपर वॉच डॉग लगा दिए। तो वो वॉच डॉग शायद पहले कम थे जिसको यूज़, जिस लिबर्टी को यूज़ करके लोगों ने कॉर्पोरेट शेल में रह के फ्रॉड किए और पब्लिक के पैसे का मिसयूज़ किया और ट्रस्ट का मिसयूज़ किया। तो शायद उन वॉच डॉग्स के थ्रू हमने उनकी वर्किंग पे एक रेगुलेटरी फ्रेमवर्क क्रिएट किया। तो वो किस तरह से कैसे क्रिएट किया, जैसे कि हमने कंपनीज एक्ट की गाइडलाइंस को बढ़ाया गया, सेबी को इनकॉर्पोरेट किया, एसएफआई को क्रिएट किया। तो किस तरह से फ्रेमवर्क इनिशिएट किया गया, हमने ये डिस्कस करना है। उसके बाद कॉर्पोरेट गवर्नेंस जो ये पूरा कॉन्सेप्ट है, ये किन की पिलर्स पे डिपेंडेंट है, हमारा पूरा फोकस किन चीज़ों को गवर्नेंस करने पर है, और धीरे 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 विद पीरियड ऑफ टाइम क्या नई चीज़ें, क्या नए रेस्ट्रिक्शंस, क्या नए इनिशिएशंस किए गए हैं टू स्ट्रेंथन ओवरऑल कॉर्पोरेट गवर्नेंस। सो बिफोर आई मूव ऑन, वी हैव टू अंडरस्टैंड दैट नॉर्मली आप में से जो लोग भी मेरे इन सेशंस को फॉलो करते हैं, करीब 60 70 80 सेशंस इस प्लेटफॉर्म पे मेरे हो चुके हैं, अराउंड 70 आई शुड से, but you will find that mostly whatever topics I have been covering, they are all in my mind, and I don't have to see any reference or book to cover even the questions. Even the questions are in mind, but this topic is quite important and I have to quote various things from the sections also. So you will find that sometimes you will feel that I am seeing from the blue and then speaking the British, because we are referring from the bare acts. That is why this quote is important. So please don't mind that. Our focus is primarily on the understanding of this very, very important topic, which has been a game changer for the overall corporate scenario after the old Companies Act 1956 was amended, after the infamous Satyam fraud, and the new Companies Act 2013 was incorporated, which primarily stressed on corporate governance and also brought up the concept of CSR, corporate social responsibility. We will also took up this topic of CSR in one of our future topics, future sessions in the coming month. So, if I start that, if I, the first word is reason. So the biggest reason to incorporate this concept of corporate governance was the Satyam fraud. So it is one of the biggest fraud of governance failure in our Indian corporate history. So Satyam Computer Services Limited, one of the most promising and sought after company was there, and there was a fraud involving the board and the auditors, where the similar auditors were, and the auditors were a very, very big name, one of the top four of auditor firms in India, and they were involved in some kind of mesh up with the board, and they just destroyed the overall trust of the government as well as the public. And after that infamous fraud of Satyam Computer Services Limited, commonly known as SIFI fraud, it was recognize that there is an urgent need to strengthen the concept of corporate governance in India. ठीक है? So simply speaking, as per the overview, I should say what is corporate governance. So what the quote is that the Cadbury Committee on Corporate Governance in its report has mentioned in 1992 that what is the generalized overview of corporate governance, that it is the system by which the companies are directed and controlled. So there are two things, how the companies are directed and controlled. So you first try to direct them. You just show the way how they should work. And if they don't want to work that way, then they need to be controlled. It is like you always teach what to do. And if you are not doing by the teachings, then you should be reprimanded and you should be told that if you're not learning by the teachings, then you will be forced to do the way we want you to do because that is not the right way you are following. So, corporate governance at the Cadbury Committee was that corporate governance is the system by which the companies are directed and controlled. ठीक? But this was just a basic overview. There was no clear definition of the word corporate governance. So later, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development (OECD) later in its report on the principles of corporate governance gave a very comprehensive definition to cover each and every aspect of the word corporate governance, and in 1999 they published their report and gave this definition of corporate governance as that it is a relationship, or I should say it is a set of relationships between a company's management, its board, its shareholders and other stakeholders. So यहाँ चार लोगों को जोड़ा गया और उनकी आपस की म्यूचुअल अंडरस्टैंडिंग और उनकी आपस की म्यूचुअल रिलेशनशिप को सबको कवर करा गया. उसमें एक वर्ड बोला गया शेयर होल्डर. शेयर होल्डर वो लोग हो गए जो कंपनी के ओनर्स हैं. कंपनी की मैनेजमेंट वो हो गई जो इमीडिएट कंपनी के कंट्रोल में है. बोर्ड जिनके पास शेयर होल्डर ने अपनी पावर डाइवर्स कर रखी है, अपॉइंट किया हुआ है टू वर्क अपॉन द मैनेजमेंट ऑफ द बिजनेस. बट बोर्ड में और मैनेजमेंट में फ़र्क ये है कि बोर्ड की मीटिंग कभी कभी होती हैं और जो डे टू डे बिजनेस की ऑर्गेनाइजेशन कर रहे हैं वो मैनेजमेंट है. तो वो मैनेजमेंट इज़ अ पार्ट ऑफ द बोर्ड, बट बोर्ड नॉर्मली डे टू डे एक्टिविटी में इन्वॉल्व नहीं है, जबकि मैनेजमेंट डे टू डे एक्टिविटी में इन्वॉल्व है. तो इट इज़ लाइक लेवल. मैनेजमेंट डे टू डे एक्टिविटी में इन्वॉल्व है, बोर्ड की डिसीजन मेकिंग में इन्वॉल्व है और शेयर होल्डर्स ओनर्स हैं. और इसके अलावा एक चौथा वर्ड मेंशन किया गया जिन्हें बोला गया स्टेक होल्डर्स. So they are like any other person, even the society, even the government is a stakeholder. They may not be the shareholder, but they are the stakeholder because they are affected directly or indirectly by the affairs of the business. So corporate governance affects not just the management, not just the board, not just the shareholder, but also the stakeholders and in their mutual relationship with each other. So corporate governance also provides the structure through which the objectives of the companies are set. मतलब क्या करेगी ये corporate governance decide करेगा, and the means of attaining those objectives. तो क्या करना है और कैसे करना है. You just cannot follow any wrong mean to achieve your objective. ठीक. जैसे कि अभी कुछ टाइम पहले वॉल्क्सवैगन के सीईओ को रिप्रेजेंट किया गया कि आपने एमिशन नॉर्म्स को फुलफिल करने के लिए कुछ मैनिपुलेशंस करे कंपनी के कंप्यूटर में, चिप्स में, और वो उन फ्रॉड मैनिपुलेशंस के कारण आपने एमिशन के नॉर्म्स अचीव करे जबकि वो गलत थे. तो आपने ऑब्जेक्टिव तो सेट करे लेकिन उसके जो प्रोसीजर्स थे वो गलत थे. तो नॉट जस्ट सेटिंग द नॉर्म्स बट आल्सो द ऑब्जेक्टिव्स के अलावा ऑब्जेक्टिव्स की अचीवमेंट कैसे होगी ये भी कॉर्पोरेट गवर्नेंस है. एंड नॉट जस्ट द प्रोसीजर्स, वी विल आल्सो फॉलो योर परफॉर्मेंस, हाउ यू आर अचीविंग दैट परफॉर्मेंस. तो वी विल फॉलो the setting of the goals, we will follow the means of attaining the objectives, and we will also follow your and we will also monitor your performance. So the good corporate governance should provide proper incentives for the board and the management to pursue objectives that are in the interests of the company and the shareholders, and should facilitate effective monitoring, thereby encouraging firms to use resources more efficiently. So what we have discussed is clearly defined in the definition, which was very well defined, with very well explained by this OECD in 1999. So generally speaking, we can say that corporate governance refers to the practices by which organizations are controlled, directed and governed. तो जो वर्ड था डायरेक्टेड एंड कंट्रोल्ड, उसके साथ एक और वर्ड जुड़ गया directed, controlled, and governed. Okay? And the basic objective to this corporate governance is to ensure that the conditions by which the organization's directors and managers act in the interest of the organization and its stakeholders also make them accountable. The corporate governance has this key aspect to bring accountability of the management towards all stakeholders, including the shareholders. So, this corporate governance concept brings accountability, and that is the key thing about this concept of corporate governance because it brings accountability. And whenever there is an accountability, there is a responsibility, and whenever there is a responsibility, there are lesser chances of malpractice. So corporate governance, because it brings accountability and responsibility, it should reduce, and it has reduced malpractices to a considerable effect after it has been incorporated in various companies that of the world slowly and slowly. And in India, we have found that we cannot say that there have not been any fraud thereafter, but it has considerably reduced. It has considerably reduced the quantum of fraud that have taken once sci-fi happened. So after that sci-fi, there has not been any such big fraud of that character thereafter once the CG concept has been incorporated in the companies at 2013. Because before that, there were various amendments made in 2000, 2001 in the original 1956 Act with immediate effect so that till new companies that comes into play, there was no other further case of corporate governance lapse. So, moving forward, we will now stress that how this new regulatory framework was created so that this concept of directing, controlling, and governing by bringing accountability comes into play. So, for this, one tool has been obviously the new Companies Act 2013. 2013 brings various sections, the Companies Act 2013 brings various sections which controls the appointment of auditors, the appointment of directors, the removal and the appointment procedures where this corporate governance has been incorporated. ठीक है उसके अलावा सेबी द सिक्योरिटीज एंड एक्सचेंज बोर्ड ऑफ इंडिया it has been one of the key monitors of the corporate activities in India, and it has been provided with greater powers and more jurisdictions, and there has been improved rules and regulations so that there is better protection of investors. So all listed companies falls under the prerogative of the SEBI, which helps to save the interests of all the investors, and SEBI prepares various rules and regulations so that there are various disclosure and listing requirements so that all interests of the investors are fulfilled, are protected. ठीक है Similarly, whenever a public company goes into listing on any stock exchange, obviously the stock exchange has to be recognized by the SEBI. So there is not any specific there is not any specific listing agreement. All listing agreements have been generalized. There has been a standard listing agreement. So all companies follow similar standardized listing procedures, listing protocols. So the investor should presume that no company is either skipping or enjoying any special privilege, and because of the presence of standard listing agreements. Similarly, when there was this sci-fi fraud, Satyam and computer fraud, there was huge lapse on accounting policies. So accounting standards have been strengthened. So Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, in accordance with international accounting standards and standard auditing practices, have made it compulsory for all the companies to follow Indian accounting standards in accordance with the international accounting standards with GAAP and uh, IFRS financial reporting standards, so that there are no manipulations possible, which, or we should say there are no material manipulations possible, which will materially affect the financial position of any company. So every company has to follow the accounting standards. So the use of accounting standards have been a part of this overall regulatory framework along with Companies Act and the SEBI guidelines to create this overall environment of corporate governance. Along with, every company has to take the services of company secretaries. So every person who is a member of the ICSI, that is a who is a qualified member of the ICS institute, that is a company secretary, has to follow standard secretarial practices. And these company secretaries ensures that there are standard corporate law procedures followed for every meeting, board meetings, and other company law procedures. So we assure that all secretarial standards, so ICSI through company secretaries assures the fulfillment of all secretarial standards by every company. ICAI through chartered accountants ensures the fulfillment of all accounting standards in disclosures and final accounts maintenance by all companies. ठीक है. SEBI ensures that all standard listing protocols are fulfilled so that there is no manipulation or loss or risk to the investors' hard earned money. And in addition, every company has to follow the procedures of appointment, removal of auditors, account directors, and all KMPs, key manager personnels, by as per the rules of the Companies Act 2013. So there has been various nails, teeth that have been strengthened around a company to create a multi-byte regulatory framework on a company so that there is a effective and multi-dimensional corporate governance regulatory framework so as to avoid any repetition of any another infamous sci-fi like fraud. Okay? So we believe that this regulatory framework is can be discussed in detail. We can always have, I should say, that each regulatory framework, whether it's of SEBI, whether it's of companies that can be discussed in detail for about 4 or 5 sessions. That all cannot be done on in this short demo session on YouTube. This is a very big topic. So for that, it depends upon the course you are pursuing. So being an advocate, we can always say that even a lectures for 20 hours can be short for corporate governance. So it depends always on your course. So for detail, you can always join to our platform and then we can discuss it there. But for an overview, I'm moving on to the next part. That what are the key pillars of the corporate governance? Now this is the crucial part. That what are the key pillars? Okay, but before I move on to this concept of key pillars, one thing I need to uh, make you clear, that whenever one of the key aspect to create a regulatory framework on corporate governance is the standard listing agreement which has been mandated by the new Companies Act. Okay? And secondly, how the new Companies Act has mandated for the creation of various committees. So the most important amendment which has been done in the new Companies Act to strengthen the regulatory framework of corporate governance is the setting up of the following four committees by the board of directors. And these four committees are, so I can always repeat, that new Companies Act has mandated that the board of directors should create the following four committees which will help in establishing a strong corporate governance mechanism. And these committees are: number one, audit committee; number two, nomination and remuneration committee; number three is stakeholders relationship committee; and number four is corporate social responsibility committee. ठीक? तो जो पहली कमेटी है ऑडिट कमेटी, इसका कंसर्न है कि ये ऑडिटर्स की अपॉइंटमेंट, रिमूवल और उनकी वर्किंग पे ध्यान रखती है। जो दूसरी कमेटी है नॉमिनेशन और रेमुनरेशन कमेटी, ये डायरेक्टर्स के अपॉइंटमेंट, उनकी सैलरी, उनकी रिमूवल, उनकी क्वालिफिकेशन डिस्क्वालिफिकेशन पे ध्यान रखती है। जो तीसरी है स्टेक होल्डर्स रिलेशनशिप कमेटी, ये ध्यान रखती है कि कंपनी का कंसर्न सिर्फ मैनेजमेंट से, बोर्ड से और शेयर होल्डर से नहीं है। जो बाकी स्टेक होल्डर्स हैं जैसे कि क्रेडिटर्स, सप्लायर्स, कम्युनिटी, कस्टमर, उन सब के साथ भी हमें रिलेशनशिप मेंटेन करनी है, बिकॉज दे आल्सो आर अफेक्टेड बाय द वर्किंग ऑफ द कंपनी। और जो चौथी है CSR कॉर्पोरेट सोशल रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी, दैट वेन एवर देयर इज अ कंपनी इट इज यूजिंग द रिसोर्सेज ऑफ द सोसाइटी, so the society is giving them, and hence company has the responsibility to give back in compensation what it has taken from the society. So it has the so the company has a responsibility towards the society, and that is what you call CSR, corporate social responsibility. So what company is doing, that needs to be looked after, and that needs to be reviewed, and that needs to be fulfilled as per the requirements of the Companies Act 2013. So it is not a voluntary liability, it has to be done because it has been made compulsory by the new Companies Act. So whether that liability has been fulfilled or not is also to be overseen through the CSR committee, Corporate Social Responsibility Committee. Just a moment. ठीक है जी। दूसरी चीज़ जो मुझे आगे स्ट्रेस करनी है कि ये जो स्टैंडर्ड लिस्टिंग एग्रीमेंट है जो सेबी ने कंपलसरी करा, उसके हिसाब से जो पहली रिक्वायरमेंट है कि आपके बोर्ड ऑफ डायरेक्टर्स की कॉम्पोजिशन एज पर कंपनी एक्ट होनी चाहिए, जिसमें इंडिपेंडेंट डायरेक्टर्स, वुमेन डायरेक्टर्स एज पर कंपनी एक्ट होने चाहिए। तो अगर आपके बोर्ड डायरेक्टर्स की कंपोजिशन एज पर कंपनी एक्ट नहीं है, देन यू आर नॉट एलिजिबल फॉर लिस्टिंग। उसके अलावा जो ऑडिट कमेटी है, अभी मैंने डिस्कस किया आपसे, तो अगर आपकी एक वैलिड ऑडिट कमेटी नहीं है तो आप एक लिस्टिंग एग्रीमेंट की एलिजिबिलिटी फुलफिल नहीं कर रहे हैं, देन यू आर नॉट अलाउड टू बी लिस्टेड। उसके अलावा एक प्रॉपर डिस्क्लोजर रिक्वायरमेंट्स हैं। तो जो डिस्क्लोजर रिक्वायरमेंट्स हैं फाइनेंशियल करेक्टर की, अगर आप वो फुलफिल नहीं करेंगे तो जो स्पिरिचुअल डिस्क्लोजर्स हैं, रेमुनरेशन के डिस्क्लोजर्स हैं, कौन कौन किस KMP के डिफरेंशियल डिस्क्लोजर्स हैं, अगर आपने वो नहीं करे तो आप लिस्टिंग के बेनिफिट नहीं ले सकते। ठीक है। उसके अलावा जो कंपनी का चीफ एग्जीक्यूटिव ऑफिसर है या CFO, चीफ फाइनेंशियल ऑफिसर्स हैं, वो कंपनी की फाइनेंशियल वायबिलिटी के बारे में, कंपनी के अकाउंट्स के ट्रू एंड फेयर करेक्टर के ऊपर अपना सर्टिफिकेशन देंगे। अगर सर्टिफिकेशन नहीं देंगे तो कंपनी लिस्टिंग के लिए एलिजिबल नहीं है। और उसके अलावा कंपनी एक रिपोर्ट देगी कि इसने अपनी लिस्टिंग के सारे रिक्वायरमेंट्स कंप्लाई कर लिए हैं। तो वो जो कंप्लायंस रिपोर्ट जब तक कंपनी सबमिट नहीं करेगी, एक एश्योरेंस कि हमने रिक्वायरमेंट की सारी कंप्लायंसेस फुलफिल कर ली हैं, अगर वो कंप्लायंस रिपोर्ट कंपनी सेबी को सबमिट नहीं करेगी, तब तक वो कंपनी लिस्टिंग के लिए एलिजिबल नहीं होगी, तब तक वो कंपनी लिस्टिंग के लिए एलिजिबल नहीं है। तो ये दो जो है बहुत की रिक्वायरमेंट्स हैं, बट इस रेगुलेटरी फ्रेमवर्क के अंदर और बहुत सारे आइटम्स हैं जो हम फिर कभी जब लाइव सेशन में बैठेंगे तब डिस्कस कर लेंगे। बट इसके अलावा जो एक लास्ट चीज़ हमने और नोटिस करनी है कि कॉर्पोरेट गवर्नेंस के अंदर कुछ की पिलर्स हैं। मतलब की पिलर्स का मतलब ये है कि हमारा फोकस सिर्फ कंपनी पे नहीं है। ठीक है। कुछ फैक्टर्स हैं जो सारे फुलफिल होने चाहिए, या कॉर्पोरेट गवर्नेंस तभी इफेक्टिव होगी, तभी सक्सेसफुल होगी जब इन सारे फैक्टर्स पे ध्यान रखा जाएगा। तो सबसे पहली चीज़ क्या है कि भाई सारे शेयर होल्डर्स, कुछ शेयर होल्डर्स के पास मेजोरिटी शेयर्स होते हैं, कुछ के पास माइनॉरिटी शेयर्स होते हैं। तो ये ना हो कि माइनॉरिटी शेयर होल्डर्स का ऑपरेशन हो जाए। तो मेजोरिटी शेयर होल्डर्स हो या माइनॉरिटी शेयर होल्डर्स हो, सबकी इक्वल ट्रीटमेंट हो, ऑल शुड बी handed justifiably. So there should not be any oppression whether of the minority or the majority. So there should be rightful and equitable treatment of all shareholders irrespective of the fact that whether they are majority or they are minority. Secondly, the interest of not just the shareholders but all other stakeholders. And those stakeholders are like employees, like investors, like creditors, like uh, loan suppliers, like local communities, like customers, like general policy makers. That is anybody who is having any even indirect interest with the affairs of the company. For example, the general society, the customer, ठीक है, supplier, they all are affected directly or indirectly by the affairs of the company. So there should be a concern for not just the shareholders but for all stakeholders. ठीक है. Thirdly, that we have to clearly define that every company success is through the board. So the board's role has to be clearly defined and they should be worth fulfilling that role. So the board should be properly qualified, they should be responsible, and so that their accountability can be fixed. So there should be a clear demarcation of the components of the board, what kind of skills they possess, so that as per their skill, their responsibility is allocated, so that there is no lapse on account of any action which is undertaken by them, so that the company's success is not in jeopardy. Then, whatever the work is being done by the company or any person on his behalf has to be ethical and with full integrity. Integrity and ethics, they need to be followed, because until a society follows these norms of ethics and integrity, we cannot have a good society, we cannot have a good business culture, and nothing can be striving for good. So this ethics and integrity need to be followed, and it is a fundamental requirement for every successful and healthy society. And last and obviously not the least, there should be full disclosure of everything, neither a partial nor a hindered. कोई hindered disclosure है, कोई partial disclosure, as someone always say, a partial disclosure is as good as a lie. There has to be a full disclosure, there has to be full disclosure of every activity. So whatever functions are performed by every public listed company is in public domain, so there should not be any hindrances, has to be fully disclosed with full transparency, so that every action is coming to the notice of the public. So these five, that is equitable treatment of all, ethics, transparency, disclosure, integrity, responsibility of the board, and interest of all stakeholders, not just the shareholders itself, needs to be fulfilled, and they will constitute the key pillars on which the whole successful building of corporate governance will be built. And we believe that a successful corporate governance mechanism will always lead to a healthy and growing business environment. On this note, normally we should close this concept of corporate governance broadly, but on the closing note, I just add that in addition to all these things, because corporate governance is a growing platform, it is growing daily and more things are added to its feather. So there are few other things which have been added slowly to make it further strong and effective. For example, SEBI has created this concept of Investor Education and Protection Fund (IEPF). So we are having the concept of whistleblower protection policy. So investor protections के बारे में, whistleblower protection के बारे में, there are various new things which are added slowly. Similarly, new committees have been created like risk management committee, internal audit committee, ठीक है, और various compliance committees, new compliance committees are being drafted by the board. So there are various developments which are done so that no aspect goes unnoticed where some sort of default can be manipulated, can be created. And all this have to be done with full integrity and full disclosure and accountability. And if we are able to do that, then we will have a strong and healthy corporate governance system, and which will bring India at par with the most developed industrialized nations in the world. On this positive note, I say goodbye to all of you. Thank you very much. Goodbye.